Welcome to the Past in Pictures channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. The power of the atomic age, opened by the attack on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, redefined war and global relations. The blast left permanent marks across the city, imprinted on stone surfaces, becoming a silent witness to the destruction of that historic moment. The collapse of German infrastructure at the end of World War II created a harsh reality of survival. In Berlin in 1945, household tasks were done in public again, such as washing clothes at fire hydrants. This scene reflects Stunde Null, the moment of starting over after total destruction. Converting industry to the war effort during World War II created deep shortages of consumer goods. In Austria, absorbed into Germany after the 1938 Anschluss, severe rationing turned a simple pair of shoes into a luxury item, and receiving them became a rare moment of joy. The collapse of European diplomacy in 1939 culminated in the invasion of Poland, starting World War II. In that rising tension, brief relaxed moments among German soldiers showed a humanity that would soon be overtaken by the brutality of a conflict that would change the world forever. Keeping the Allied offensive moving in 1945 required a monumental logistics effort on German soil. Wear and tear on armored vehicles like the M18 tank destroyer demanded constant repairs at field depots, essential to sustain the advance. This frontline maintenance capability was a decisive factor in the collapse of the German regime. The Great Depression's economic collapse redefined childhood for an entire generation in the 1930s. The crisis, marked by massive unemployment and rural poverty, forced children to face a harsh reality of scarcity. That experience of material deprivation deeply shaped 20th century society. Turning home life into a battlefront was one consequence of World War II. With food rationing, every family meal became an act of resilience and togetherness. Keeping that routine was an effort to preserve normal life amid the anxiety of a global conflict. Rebuilding Polish identity after the war was a challenge as great as the physical reconstruction. After Warsaw's systematic destruction as a consequence of the 1944 uprising, people looked for ways to restore normal life. Painted backdrops over ruins were an act of resilience meant to create new memories. Turkey's westernization, driven by Ataturk's reforms, radically reshaped society. Shortly after the adoption of the Latin alphabet in 1928, meant to modernize and secularize the country, daily life in Istanbul carried on, blending the weight of tradition with new Western customs. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the fires that followed caused one of the greatest urban disasters in American history, exposing the vulnerability of modern cities. The catastrophe drove advances in seismology and civil engineering, forever changing building standards. The constant threat of air raids during the Blitz in World War II transformed civilian life in the United Kingdom. This total war reality, which blurred the line between front and home, led to unusual solutions to protect every family member, including pets. Raising the stakes of the Cold War space race, Belka and Strelka's orbital flight in August 1960 was a decisive step for the Soviet Union. Their safe return proved living beings could survive in space, validating the technology that would take Yuri Gagarin into orbit less than a year later. The Allied advance in the Pacific depended on projecting sea-based air power, a doctrine strengthened in World War II. Aircraft carriers like the USS Enterprise CV-6 served as mobile bases, allowing SBD-5 Dauntless bombers to strike enemy positions on strategic islands in November 1943. The approach of World War II hung over the United States in 1940. A transitional period still marked by the Great Depression. Local commerce like general stores in Vermont formed the backbone of a slowly recovering economy, with daily life about to be changed forever by the war effort and rationing. Driven by the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl dust storms, an unprecedented rural exodus marked the United States in the 1930s. This forced migration pushed farm families to states like Arizona, where the search for seasonal work led to a life of instability and extreme poverty. The United States' entry into World War I in 1917 marked a turning point in the conflict. In New York City, daily life was filled with wartime tension, with the city serving as a crucial port for shipping troops and supplies, even under a harsh winter that covered its new automobiles. Industrial acceleration and geopolitical tensions that culminated in World War I defined the 1910s. The global conflict not only redrew maps and ushered in technological warfare, but also shattered the belief in non-stop progress, shaping the future of an entire generation. Family intimacy became a rare refuge. As a result of the division imposed by the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, the fate of thousands of families was sealed by separation. The prisoner issue became a stalemate in peace talks, making this reunion between a mother and her son from the North a rare glimpse of hope in a deeply painful context. Seeking to reverse territorial losses from the Winter War, Finland launched the Continuation War against the Soviet Union. The capture of Petrozavodsk in 1941 marked a significant advance, and an officer's gesture in front of a statue of the Bolshevik leader reveals the intense ideological rivalry fueling the conflict. A daring escape from a prisoner camp during the Second Boer War turned the young Winston Churchill into a national hero. This conflict, fought by the British Empire in South Africa, was crucial in building his reputation and boosting his newly started political career in the British Parliament. The vulnerability of Second Industrial Revolution-era technology infrastructure was exposed by an extreme weather event. The Great Blizzard of 1888 shut down New York by destroying overhead telegraph and electrical wires. This collapse forced cities to rethink modernization and pushed projects to bury cables underground. The struggle to survive during the Great Depression reshaped the idea of home for millions of Americans. The devastating economic crisis forced families in rural Tennessee to show remarkable resilience, building makeshift shelters on the frames of abandoned cars, a testament to ingenuity born from necessity. The Great Depression's economic uncertainty made mail carriers in the United States even more important, since they were vital links for a society in crisis. As telephone service expanded as a newer form of communication, the physical delivery of newspapers and letters remained irreplaceable for keeping news moving and families connected. Immersed in the Great Depression, the United States in 1930 lived a paradox. The 1929 stock market crash brought unemployment and hardship, contrasting with symbols of hope like the Statue of Liberty. In that setting, housework and the routines of ordinary people represented a daily struggle for survival. The effort to document America at the end of the Great Depression, led by the Farm Security Administration, captured a country in transition. In 1940, while Europe was already at war, the United States was preparing for industrial mobilization that would end the economic crisis and change everyday life in towns like Chillicothe. Rising World War II tensions in Europe contrasted with the search for normal life in American homes. Thanksgiving in 1940, 1 year before Pearl Harbor, reinforced values of togetherness and prosperity, serving as a symbolic refuge in the face of an approaching conflict. A symbol of resilience. After World War II, Paris's return to everyday life was slow and challenging. Newly freed from German occupation, the city faced shortages, but simple acts like carrying a baguette and wine represented reclaiming identity and joy in daily life. World War II. Industrial mobilization brought millions of women into the workforce, but it did not free them from exhausting household tasks like cleaning diapers. This double shift highlighted the tension between the war effort and traditional gender roles of the time. The push for military superiority before World War II drove technologies like acoustic locators. In 1930s Japan, this arms race appeared in equipment like the Type 90, inspected by the Japanese leader, a clear sign of modernization for expansionist plans. A symbol of German engineering and propaganda between the wars, the Graf Zeppelin dominated transatlantic air routes. This age of giant airships offered a brief but luxurious alternative to ocean travel. Maintenance while airborne in 1934 highlighted the dangers and daring of the technology. Making racial separation official state policy was the foundation of South Africa's apartheid regime. A decade after it was formally established, this division showed up plainly in daily life, controlling access to public spaces and normalizing deep social inequality among citizens. The increased Western presence in China after the suppression of the Boxer Rebellion began a period of heavy foreign intervention. In this setting of national humiliation and Qing dynasty decline, Western anthropology recorded local daily life through a lens that often reinforced stereotypes. Rising industrialization in the early 20th century United States contrasted with rural life in places like West Virginia. In these areas, self-sufficiency was the norm, and hunting was not sport, but a necessity for survival, requiring everyone's participation, including women, challenging stereotypes. Christianity's consolidation as a dominant force in the 4th century transformed the cultural landscape of the Roman Empire. Cities like ancient Antioch, now Antakya, one of the early centers of the new faith, prospered as hubs of power and art, expressing wealth in vast, detailed mosaics. 19th century photography revolutionized archaeology by allowing precise records of civilizations once obscured. This scientific advance drove expeditions into the jungles of Honduras, proving essential to rediscovering Maya culture and understanding its monumental art. Driven by post-revolutionary Mexico's indigenismo, valuing indigenous cultures strengthened national identity. This political and cultural current reframed celebrations like those in Oaxaca, turning them into symbols of a country seeking to integrate its many roots and traditions. The demographic shift caused by European immigration in the early 20th century is visible on New York streets. Millions of people, including Italians, sought the American dream, but found a reality of hard work and tenements. Street markets were vital for survival and social cohesion in these communities. The rise of Hollywood's star system turned actors into global icons. Mary Pickford, a co-founder of United Artists, embodied the era, often playing innocent young roles, as in Through the Back Door in 1921, strengthening silent film as the leading form of mass entertainment. Vibrant cultural mosaics like the Lower East Side emerged from the intense European immigration wave of the early 20th century. The Yiddish sign and the street musician with his barrel organ revealed daily life in these communities, which, in seeking new opportunities, helped shape New York's multicultural identity. The cultural energy of the Années Folles turned Paris into the world center of the avant-garde after World War I. This period of optimism and social liberation drew artists and intellectuals who redefined modernity with new forms of expression set against the conflict's deep wounds. The buildup of fortunes in America's Gilded Age funded opulent architecture, a symbol of new industrial power. In an era marked by aggressive capitalism, tycoons displayed status with mansions that imitated European castles. In Topeka, Erastus R. Stone's 1887 residence was one such example. Post-war economic expansion in North America established ice hockey as mass entertainment. This period, known as the NHL Original Six era, saw the sport's popularity explode, with referees like Frank Udvari becoming central figures in packed arenas such as Toronto's. The democratization of leisure, driven by the Victorian-era railroad network, transformed seaside resorts like Brighton in the early 20th century. Once aristocratic retreats, they became mass destinations, creating new jobs like lifeguards to keep growing crowds safe. The shift of fishing into an elite sport in the late 19th century reflected the rise of a new wealthy class. This cultural change turned places like Catalina Island into record-setting stages, where Edward Llewellyn displayed his giant sea base as a prestige trophy, symbolizing the era's status and power. Rising political polarization in the United States in the 1990s reached a peak with the scandal involving Monica Lewinsky. The president's public denial of the affair triggered the country's second impeachment process, exposing partisan divisions and reshaping the relationship between media and power. As Cold War tensions eased, collective fears shifted from external threats to internal terrors. In 1990, the adaptation of it captured that mood, with Tim Curry portraying evil hidden behind a familiar face, tapping into traumas society preferred to ignore. Still far from the Cold War conflicts that would later shape his path, a young Osama bin Laden experienced a family trip to Sweden in 1970. The later Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which would reshape the region and his international role, was unthinkable in that moment of apparent Western calm. Cold War tension defined global politics, but the public image of the American presidency took on a family normality. While the world lived under nuclear threat, the White House was presented as a home. John Jr. playing in the Oval Office humanized power during a time of extreme polarization. The solidifying of fast food culture marked post-war economic expansion in the United States. Driven by a new lifestyle centered on convenience, this trend deeply changed eating habits. Colonel Sanders in 1966 embodied that shift by expanding Kentucky Fried Chicken across the country. Assembly line efficiency applied to cooking transformed the post-war restaurant industry. The system created by the McDonald brothers in San Bernardino in 1948 prioritized speed and low cost, perfectly fitting a new American lifestyle centered on cars and convenience. Driven by post-war economic optimism, 1950s consumer culture transformed everyday life. In that setting, Coca-Cola vending machines became icons of the American way of life, representing modernity and convenience becoming accessible to a growing middle class. A new car customization culture grew in the United States with post-World War II prosperity. In that setting, engineers like Norman Timms created one-of-a-kind vehicles, like his 1947 Special, reflecting a pursuit of design and performance. These handcrafted creations marked an era of individualism before full mass production. Widespread car ownership in the 1920s reshaped the idea of family freedom. What had once been a luxury became a symbol of mobility for families like the Noonans, enabling weekend drives and expanding the horizons of suburban life, a hallmark of the consumer era. A new culture of leisure and mobility grew with mass-produced automobiles in the 1920s. This trend made travel accessible, letting families explore the country in new ways in adapted vehicles, symbols of freedom and optimism that would later be shaken by the Great Depression. The spread of the internal combustion engine and assembly lines in the 1920s made personal transportation accessible. Motorcycles like this Harley-Davidson, fitted with a sidecar for practicality, became symbols of freedom and mobility for a growing middle class that could now travel and explore like never before. Linking vast territories, early 20th century railroad expansion powered industrialization and global trade. Maintaining that infrastructure required constant, strict oversight. As a result, the track inspector, using adapted vehicles, emerged as a crucial figure for safety and progress. Just before World War I transformed the world, domestic life in 1914 still followed its routine course. The coming global conflict not only redrew maps and dissolved empires, but also abruptly ended an era, forever changing how people viewed safety and progress. Belle Epoque optimism flowed through society in the early 20th century, a period of apparent peace and prosperity reflected in formal dress and social occasions. That stability, however, would be sharply interrupted by the outbreak of World War I, forever changing family structures and women's roles. The post-World War I spirit of freedom reshaped women's roles in the 1920s, giving rise to the new woman. This social change allowed women to seek more independence and take part in activities once restricted to them, like sports clubs. The bicycle, popularized as a symbol of emancipation, illustrates that shift. Driven by post-World War I social change, Roaring Twenties fashion became a symbol of women's emancipation. The flapper silhouette, with drop-waist dresses and cloche hats, broke with Victorian rigidity, expressing women's new freedom and independence in the streets. A symbol of a behavioral revolution, the miniskirt dominated London streets in 1969, the heart of the swinging 60s. The piece represented women's liberation and the challenge to conservative norms, breaking the rigidity of the post-war era and marking a decade of youth-driven social change. The rise of consumer culture in the Dutch post-war period reshaped urban leisure. This time of economic prosperity, known as wederopbouw, allowed ordinary people to go to bars and enjoy new forms of entertainment, like arcade machines, symbols of renewed optimism. The transformation of bodybuilding from a niche pursuit into a global phenomenon had roots in post-war Europe. In this rebuilding era, a young Arnold Schwarzenegger took his first steps in modest competitions in Austria, foreshadowing the golden era he would help define and reshaping Western ideals of strength and physical aesthetics. Women's growing entry into the workforce in the 1960s marked a deep social change. In that context, model Mae Musk appears in a setting with then cutting-edge tools like the typewriter, representing office modernization before the digital revolution. In 1976, actress and model Jessica Lange is photographed by Giancarlo Botti in an indoor photo shoot with decor typical of the 1970s. The image shows Lange early in her career, before roles that would make her known in film. The portrait circulated as an editorial photo and helps place the styles and fashion of the period. The rise of the director as an author and public figure defined Hollywood's golden age. Alfred Hitchcock, a master of suspense, embodied this trend by using his own image in promotional materials. His pose on the River Thames in 1958 reflects the dark humor that made him famous, turning him into a brand as powerful as his films. The search for refuge from harsh post-World War I reality boosted the popularity of stories that celebrated innocence. Christopher Robin and the bear that inspired Winnie the Pooh embodied this trend, becoming icons of literary escapism that flourished in Roaring Twenties mass culture. The post-war solidifying of the American dream fueled a culture of optimism and consumption in the United States. In that period, Hollywood helped create and export glamour ideals, producing icons like Jane Mansfield, who became a symbol of the blonde bombshell archetype, reflecting the era's opulence and bold femininity. The personal computer revolution found one of its catalysts in the Apple II, introduced by Steve Jobs in 1977. This technological milestone was crucial in making computing accessible beyond large companies and helped start the era of personal computing that would transform society worldwide. The spread of personal computers in the 1980s sparked an intense race for innovation. This 1983 Apple prototype was already exploring the integration of telephone functions with a touch-sensitive screen, anticipating digital convergence by decades. That radical vision only became practical with miniaturization. The growing use of the hypodermic syringe in the mid-19th century transformed Victorian medicine and pain control. Makers like Mayer and Meltzer of London produced kits to inject medicinal substances, but the innovation also brought troubling effects, revealing a sensitive side of medical progress. A major social change around the turn of the 20th century was the rise of studio photography. This technological advance made formal portraits accessible beyond the elite, letting families build a visual legacy and affirm values of stability amid intense American industrialization. 19th century industrialization pushed brands like Guinness to a global scale, but quality still depended on manual trades. Smelling barrels as an inspection step was crucial, a specialized skill that ensured standardized flavor before full automation of production processes. Powered by steam, the British Empire reached its peak in the late 19th century. In London's ports, the mix of sailing ships and steamships showed the technological shift speeding up global trade, linking the metropolis to its colonies and reinforcing British naval dominance. Post-war economic recovery in Great Britain brought a renewed sense of normal life, letting families seek leisure in places like the London Zoo. This period marked the end of austerity, a social relief that gave people back moments of optimism and simplicity after years of hardship and conflict. The post-war population surge, the baby boom, marked an era of optimism and renewed focus on the family. This period of social rebuilding after World War II valued childhood and outdoor play as symbols of normal life and hope for a generation growing up in a new world. The termination policy of the 1950s aimed to assimilate native peoples, threatening their sovereignty. In this tense context, Corporal Bill Yallop, a Yakima soldier beside his father, a tribal chief during military training, symbolizes the duality of serving a nation that was also undermining his culture and ancestral lands. The Second Industrial Revolution helped popularize mass-produced toys, but this new consumer culture was not yet universal in the late 19th century. In many homes, children's creativity thrived with handmade objects using simple household materials, a testament to a childhood shaped by simplicity and the transition to modern life. The complex shift from the British Empire to the Commonwealth shaped Queen Elizabeth II's visit to India in 1961. Only 14 years after independence, her presence in Delhi represented a diplomatic effort to redefine the relationship between former imperial power and sovereign nation, now as equal partners. The rise of socialism and labor movements in the Progressive Era provided raw material for Jack London's work. Written amid California's landscapes, his stories explored class struggle and the brutality of survival, giving voice to the marginalized and influencing social debate in the 1910s.